Good morning and welcome to the second day of SaRM's Urban Drainage Group's virtual training on sustainable drainage systems. Today's session is going to be focusing on the opportunities and benefits of SuDS and how these can help support partnership working. As most of you were here yesterday, I dispensed with many of the introductions just to say that I'm Paul and I coordinate the work that we undertake at Syria on sustainable water management. I've been moderating and facilitating today like yesterday, and I'm also going to be joined by Elliot, Fiona and Jenny from the Urban Drainage Groups Committee. So they may be popping in to some of the sessions to help you out. And like yesterday, there's just a few things I would like to run through with you with regards to an overview on some of the activities that the Urban Drainage Group have got going forward. So the nominations for the WAPAG Prize 2021 are open, and it'd be great to receive those nominations before the 9th of July. And this is really to showcase those people and groups, people that have done some really good work with regards to the urban drainage work areas. The summer virtual event will be taking place in August, and a call for papers was launched yesterday and should be available on the website. And then there's also other events going on later in November, which is the main annual conference, and it'd be great to see some of you there. And also we have the Integrated Urban Drainage Modelling Guide is being updated and should be available pretty soon. So before we launch into our talks this morning, I just want to have a quick recap on the housekeeping, just to remind you of how it all works. On the left-hand side of your screen, you will notice the areas that we are. So at the moment, we're in stage. Your breakout sessions will be in the session, and we will go into those after the comfort break. And really, please do make great use of the networking. So this is really just an opportunity for you to speak with colleagues and understand from them how they found the morning and also what they do. So please make use of that networking opportunity. It's a bit like speed dating. There is an initial 30 seconds that you're stuck in that room, or you can just leave if that you're so inclined. But there's also an opportunity to extend that, so you're not limited to 30 seconds if you're having a wonderful time. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties throughout these sessions, please contact the events team using the help desk in the breakout session area, or emailing them at events@sarm.org. And we're also joined again today by Irina, Maria and Roxana from the SaRM events team. So this morning's presentations, we will be hearing from our keynote speaker, Emily Clarke, followed by a double act of Neil Kirsopp and Bryony Crickmore, and then we'll be finishing with Chris Digman. So as you did yesterday, please do respond or get involved by responding to polls and also posing questions. We'd ask you to post the questions in the stage tab, because otherwise it makes it difficult to try and work out where all the questions coming from. And I think we gave you two pieces of homework. The first one was to look at and familiarize yourself with BEST from the delegate pack. So hopefully you still got the delegate pack and you've got that to hand. And also it'd be really useful if you could have downloaded BEST. So both the link for the delegate briefing pack and BEST are available in the reception area. And I think if you've got neither of those, you're going to find the breakout sessions really quite challenging, but I would hope that you have at least the briefing pack from yesterday, and one of you has downloaded in your session, one of you has downloaded BEST. So we don't have a panel discussion session this morning, so we can make the best use of those practical sessions, but we will have a comfort break at 11:10 and where we will turn from the practical sessions. The first session is really mirroring what we've done in the presentations, and we'll be looking at the SuDS opportunities and focusing on SuDS opportunity mapping, where you'll be having a look at the two different scenarios that are in the delegate pack. And after we've had some feedback, we will then look at what the potential SuDS design concepts were, and then think about how this could be influencing the benefits from that site. And then we will talk about that during your session. So as I suggested, we'll be using polls and we'll be making good use of the chat. So if I just want to introduce the session really, and I think it might be helpful just to do a little bit of a recap. But before I do that, I really want to thank the presenters and co-facilitators for their time for today and also yesterday. So this isn't really possible without them contributing their time and helping us develop the information presentations and practical sessions. So what did we learn yesterday? We learned that many of the UK's water companies are starting to embrace SuDS, whether that be for retrofitting or whether that be through supporting adoption through the design and construction guidance. SuDS help the water companies respond to challenges around resilience, storm water overflows, and also help deliver their public interest commitment. SuDS involving multiple disciplines can deliver multiple benefits for multiple stakeholders. However, the quality of SuDS can be really variable, and it's important that this process of SuDS design is underpinned by early and effective engagement and a coherent design philosophy. The approach to SuDS adoption can be quite tricky, but the design and construction guidance will help provide some clarity around that going forward. And also these challenges around adoption can be resolved by early engagement. What we want you to go away with from these sessions is really realize there's a role for you to play in how SuDS get taken forward. And there's a role for a number of disciplines, whether it be modelers, urban designers, landscape architects, civil engineers, drainage engineers, to get involved in delivery of good practice. And I also just wanted to let you know that later on today we'll be sharing with you another pack with some downloads for the case studies that we discussed yesterday. So today's session is about the opportunities and benefits of SuDS and how these can underpin partnerships to bring about improvements in how surface water is being managed. Emily, our first presenter, will discuss how partnership working can support delivery of SuDS and other nature-based solutions. Emily will explain what supports collaboration to deliver SuDS, and this will then be followed by Neil and Bryony, who will provide an overview of the process to help determine the SuDS opportunities from a given site and look at how information and different data sets can be considered to identify what type of SuDS go where. And then Chris will provide an overview of the approaches to assess the benefits of SuDS, and also providing an overview of BEST, which is Serious Benefits Estimation Tool. So let's kick off the first session, and it's time for me to introduce our keynote speaker, Emily Clarke, who's from Anglian Water, and we'll be discussing the opportunities, as I said, around developing partnerships for SuDS and nature-based solutions. Emily is a chartered water and environmental manager with 8 years of experience. She joined Anglian Water in 2017 as the flood partnership manager. Her roles and responsibilities are entirely focused on partnership funding and program manages Anglian Water's contributions to flood risk management schemes delivered by the Risk Management Authority partners. Previously, Emily has also worked for Cambridgeshire County Council and the Environment Agency. Emily is a member of several working and policy advisory groups, including the Catchment-Based Approach Flood Group, the CIREM Flood and Coastal Erosion Management SCRM Specialist Panel, and Syria's Natural Flood Management Manual Project Steering Group. So before Emily gets started, please do ask some questions, and there will be a chance for clarifications at the end. So, and also prior to Emily speaking, if we could just run the poll, that would be great, and I will give the results back later on in the clarification. So over to you, Emily.
Wonderful. Are we doing the poll first, sorry?
Yeah, the poll's running now, but if you want to start your presentation, we can feedback in the clarifications.
Sure, perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Next slide, please. As Paul said, I'll be talking to you about partnerships and the opportunities and benefits of those. So first of all, it's important to say that we are a regulated industry, and one of our key regulators is Ofwat on the left there. We have duties under legislation, but we also really care about our customers and our environment. And we've made legally binding changes to our company constitution. We've made our company purpose to deliver environmental and social prosperity to our customers and communities across our region. We've also set out how we want to fulfill our purpose through our AMP7 business plan, which you can see there on the right. So that's what we're doing between 2020 and 2025. As well as our longer term strategic direction statement, which is a longer term plan over the next 25 years. Next slide, please. So I thought it'd be good just to talk to you about our region first of all. So I won't go through all of those figures. I'll let you read those while I'm talking. But it is important to note that we are the largest water company by geographical area, and we have some really significant challenges now and in the future. So we have some of the fastest growing populations in our region. We also have some of the lowest lying land, including the lowest point in the UK. We also are the driest region, but also have significant flood risk. So as I said, we've got lots of low lying land. The fens, for example, are mostly below sea level. And with climate change and sea level rise, all of these challenges are just going to get even more challenging. Next slide, please. So I will talk to you mostly about flooding today, and on the left there, the box shows our ambitions that we've set out in our strategic direction statement, which I mentioned earlier. On the right, you can see two dials there. Oh, sorry. With the ambitions, it's really important to say that they are really stretching, and there's no way that we can achieve these by working in isolation. Working in partnership is going to be absolutely critical, because as well, we're not accountable to achieve these in isolation. So making the east of England resilient to both drought and flooding is going to be really difficult, and we need to work with our partners to achieve that. So those dials on the right, they've been taken directly from our climate adaptation report, which we actually submitted to DEFRA a year early in 2019, and we were the first company to do so. So the dials concentrate on flooding in two distinct categories: flooding to our assets and flooding from our assets. So the sewer flooding on the right is flooding caused by our assets. If we did nothing, we'd be firmly in the red. We're currently in the amber, but we believe we can get to the green, and working in partnership is going to be a huge part of this stretching target. Our main drivers are ensuring that our assets are fit for purpose and not dealing with flooding sources beyond our control. So such as land drainage and fluvial overtopping, removing these sources of flooding as well as excess surface water from our assets is a really key benefit of working in partnership. And we're also really pleased to say that we made it onto the global A list for our climate adaptation plans, and that's just that bit in red on the side as well. So next slide, please. I keep talking about working in partnership. So who are our partners? So these are the partners that we have in our region. So on the left there is the boundaries of the different councils, and on the right are the different partners that we work with. So it's really important when we're thinking about working in partnership for flood risk management to understand the roles and responsibilities of our partners and what their drivers are for working in partnership, and what their remits are. So the Environment Agency, for example, is responsible for managing flood risk from rivers and the sea. And so all of their flood risk management projects are going to be focusing mainly on managing those sources of flooding. The councils are responsible for managing surface water and groundwater flood risk. So we work with the lead local flood authorities and the highways agencies to manage those sources of flood risk, which also interact with our assets, as I mentioned. And then I mentioned earlier the fens and the really low-lying areas within our region. The fens is a heavily pumped catchment, and the internal drainage board partners are absolutely critical in that water level management. And so their motivations for flood risk management is focusing on those sources of flooding. And so by understanding the roles and responsibilities of each partners, it enables those effective collaboration and partnerships to develop so that we can provide the best flood risk management solutions for our communities. And we all know that water doesn't respect boundaries, so sometimes those partnerships grow, and it could be a number of those partners across different geographical areas. Next slide, please. So the benefits of working in partnership, I thought I'd just list them out for you here. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just some of the main ones that I thought I'd highlight to you. So in my experience and in our experience, many of the schemes that we've contributed to towards through our AMP7, through our partnership funding programme, which is what I manage, wouldn't go ahead without our contributions. So our contributions enable our partners to attract other sources of funding like government grant and aid, like EU Interreg funding, and also it's used to attract local enterprise partnership funding, as well as many other sources. And without our contributions, some of these schemes just wouldn't get off the ground in the first place. So our partners are able to do more for their available funding by us working in partnership. It also enables us to support our communities as well. So we can deliver, working in partnership enables us a broader understanding of the risks and opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, understanding the roles and responsibilities of all of those different partners is really key, because then we understand what's truly happening on the ground, and water is often a very complicated mixture of flooding sources. And so working together breaks down those silos and siloed thinking. On the right, I just listed out the benefits to us as a water company from our partnership funding programme. So in AMP6, our partnership funding programme was a £7.5 million investment. We delivered 40 schemes with a range of benefits to reduce flood risk to our assets and our customers from a variety of sources, in partnership with all of those partners that I mentioned in the previous slide. These schemes saved us over £35 million. So that's CapEx or capital savings. So if we were to provide those same benefits that we got by working in isolation and silos, it would have cost us more than £35 million more. And working in partnership provides an increased resilience to our assets and our communities as well for lower investments. So providing our customers with the very best value for their money. And of course, the reason we do all of this is for our communities. Collaborative partnerships deliver more for less, and they reduce flood risk from multiple sources. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd go over a few scheme examples from AMP6. So this one was led by Essex County Council at Basildon Hospital in Essex. This scheme, so both the hospital and the local community was suffering surface water flooding. And so we looked, Essex County Council looked at the Basildon Hospital, and there was loads of hard standing and hard paved areas. So what we did was retrofit SuDS and rain gardens, and also an attenuation basin here, which took the rainwater from the roofs and those hard surfaces and dealt with it on site. So not only did it reduce the risk of flooding to the hospital and the local communities, it also made that whole area look much better, feel much better, and it was a much better well-being and amenity space for not just the hospital staff, but their patients and also their visitors as well. It's also a much better biodiversity area. It also reduces heat to the hospital as well. So it's a really multi-beneficial scheme. And our contribution was towards a flood risk management reduction. So taking the majority of that surface water out of our assets, which then reduced the flood risk further down on our network. Next slide, please. Another scheme that we did was in Peterborough, so with Peterborough City Council on the Werrington Brook. So this is an urban watercourse around 2.5 kilometres long. Our contribution went towards enhancing and repairing 25 outfalls into the river. and other improvements, we're creating pools, riffles and meanders in the watercourse to make it more resilient to pollution risks now and into the future. On the bottom left there's a yellow fish. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of the yellow fish campaign, but we worked with the communities and the schools to educate the community about when you put water down drains that are marked with a yellow fish, they drain directly out into the environment. So not to our water recycling centres like a lot of people think, it goes straight into the environment. So thinking about people that pour fat down drains or things like plaster and cement residue, all of that goes directly into the environment and causes significant pollution. So the community is much more informed now of what happens, and all of those wider biodiversity and habitat benefits were really great from this multi-beneficial scheme. Next slide, please. This final one wasn't actually a flood risk management scheme, but it was a really multi-beneficial scheme with nature-based solutions. So this was from a water quality driver. So our funding, we funded low carbon wetland treatment areas next to our works to, as I said, treat the water quality. It also provided great enhancements to the habitat and biodiversity in the area. We've actually had loads of people come along to kind of count the different species that are now living there, which is really fantastic. And this is completely opposite to our more traditional concrete-led solutions that we otherwise would have done if we hadn't been working in partnership with the Norfolk Rivers Trust. But the reason why I wanted to highlight it is because off the back of this scheme, we're now starting to look at where we might be able to deliver similar solutions for a flood risk benefit. So we're talking to the Norfolk Rivers Trust again and Norfolk County Council about possibly doing something similar in Dereham. Next slide, please. And so I thought I'd just tell you quickly how we assess the benefits. So on the right there is our partnership funding application form. We of course work with our partners to develop the schemes in partnership and develop the optioneering so that we maximise the benefits for our contributions. Our partners then ask us for a partnership funding contribution. We've created our partnership funding application by adapting some UCWIR research, which I've just put in the bullets there if anyone's interested in that. And we also ask our partners to undertake a best assessment for each of their schemes. So as I've said, our partnership funding programme is primarily a flood risk management funding programme. But there are so many other benefits to it, such as mental and health and well-being, amenity spaces, biodiversity, water quality, all of these different things. We're using the best tool to try and build up this evidence base. And what I'd really like to do in the future is see if we can broaden out this valuing of the benefits to value water more holistically. There's also lots of other partners that could get involved. So I mentioned earlier the hospital, the NHS is clearly benefiting from that scheme. So should they be one of the funding partners, for example, and we're trying to encourage our partners to think about that as well. And we are working with our partners on our drainage and wastewater management plans, and partnership funding will be firmly under that umbrella in the future. So that's really important work that's going on. And then finally, another benefit that we really would like to understand more, and we're going to be focusing a lot on this AMP in the next few years, is understanding the future operational or OPEX savings. So where we've reduced flood risk in Basildon, for example, we now don't need to send out tankers when those communities are flooding. So what's the savings cost of that? What's the reduced pumping cost? What's the reduced carbon cost, for example? And then there's other benefits such as CMEX. I'm not sure if everyone knows what CMEX is, but essentially we value how our customers think about us and how they see us. And, you know, reduced flood risk is a really good thing for our communities, and they really appreciate it. So putting a value on that would be really good to understand as well. Anyway, I appreciate that's a really quick run over of lots of different things. So if anyone's got any questions, I'd be really happy to take them now or offline. Thank you for listening.
Great stuff. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for that. That's a really good overview of that. And I think it kind of, it underpins the importance of those discussions and those engagement. I'm glad that you're also looking for evidence in terms of the benefits. So that's great. So before we get started, and there are a few questions coming through, so that's great. Also, please remember there's an opportunity to upvote for some of those questions. Let's go to the results of the poll. So the question was, what do you think are the biggest benefits from creating partnerships for SuDS and nature-based solutions? So we had increased amenity, increased biodiversity, increased health benefits, reduced risk of flooding, betterment of water quality. So reduced risk of flooding came out the strongest, so 41% of delegates saying that, or who voted, and then that was closely followed by increased biodiversity, so which is quite interesting. So on many of the examples on best, we found that amenity actually and health and well-being provide the greatest benefits over them flooding. So that's an interesting response in terms of perceptions. So let's have a think about some of these questions. Okay, so we've got a number of questions and we've got some time to cover them, so please include some more if you want to. But the first question, Emily, is are you able to share the criteria of what kind of schemes can, oh sorry, I read the wrong one. So in the partnership schemes you have delivered, how was future ownership and maintenance discussed and defined, particularly if there are different assets working together as part of the scheme?
Yeah, really good question. So for AMP6, most of the new assets are under the responsibility of the lead partner. Some of them do create further assets. So actually the Basildon Hospital one, for example, that attenuation basin that I mentioned was on our land. And so we further enhanced what was there. And so that was already one of our assets. And we've just taken that on. And what we do is we factor in that future maintenance to our partnership funding contribution, because otherwise, you know, we might be paying or look to be paying twice, and that's not the best value for our customers' money. But for the most part, the assets that are created are managed by our partners, and so that we haven't really got involved in most of those discussions.
Great, thank you for that answer, Emily. So also yesterday I mentioned about some of the work that Syria did for Greater London Authority on some guidance on retrofitting, and we actually got the Basildon case study within that, and we talk about some of the hooks that a hospital might want to think about when considering retrofitting. So
oh, great.
Okay, so the next question is, hi Emily, on fitting new outfalls to reduce the risk of flooding, was modelling done to see how resilient the outfalls were to river levels? How were impacts of river locking managed?
Really good question, and I can't answer that one myself actually, because I'm not a modeller, but we do look at that. I know that one of the first steps that we do when we get partnership funding asked is to work with our modelers to make sure that the scheme will work. So we have our own models. We can also put our models, we can combine them with our partners' models if appropriate, just to make sure that the flood risk isn't being made worse either to the communities or to our assets. So yeah, if that doesn't really answer your question, I'm happy for you to drop me a line and I can get a modeller to provide the correct answer for you.
Great stuff. Well, thank you for that, Emily. I think we've run out of time for questions, but hopefully there might be an opportunity for a bit more discussion and after the practical session. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Great stuff. So we're now going to be joined by Neil Kirsopp and Bryony Crickmore from Atkins, who will be providing an overview of opportunity mapping for SuDS. So let's introduce Neil. Neil's an experienced engineer, having worked for 18 years in environmental protection, flood risk management, drainage and engineering in both project lead and technical lead roles. Neil has undertaken, led and managed numerous programs of work relating to strategy, planning, asset management and capital works. He has extensive experience of site-specific flood risk, conceptual and detailed design of drainage schemes and managing flood risk assets. So Bryony, who will be joining us a bit later to give half of the presentation, has worked in the water industry since graduating in 2013, and she has now been at Atkins for over 5 years. Her background is in wastewater hydraulic modelling, but over the past 3 years, her focus has shifted towards surface water management and SuDS projects. So, as again, there's still an opportunity to ask questions, and please keep those coming. And there will be a poll during Neil's presentation, and so please respond to that when asked to. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Paul. Morning, everybody. Good to be here today. We're about to talk about opportunity mapping for SuDS, obviously, and just to, next slide, please, just to go through the contents. Bryony, if you could just go through.
Yeah, so between myself and Neil, we'll be covering what is opportunity mapping, why we'd be using opportunity mapping, the processes to create the mapping, any sort of considerations and constraints that we need to investigate, the outputs, and I guess essentially the purpose of the opportunity mapping, and finally an example of how we would use opportunity mapping. Okay, next slide, please.
Thank you, Bryony. So, well, opportunity mapping is a multi-layered assessment for the potential SuDS in a given location. So, be that a specific site, a local vicinity, or a wider catchment. And the idea behind opportunity mapping is that an assessment is automatically undertaken based on the information that's input. So to compute through, design a set parameters to give the blue-green opportunities that present themselves for that location. It processes an awful lot of data to produce a graphical representation, usually on a GIS platform, the SuDS opportunities that might be available for that given location. Each of the opportunities would have a lot of information behind it, but like everything, what you get out is dependent on what you put in. So by using a wide variety of data sets, a comprehensive assessment can be undertaken. Opportunity mapping does not provide all the answers. It's a tool to help us plan, design, and enable blue-green infrastructure to be constructed wherever possible. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'd like to do a quick poll. It should be in the poll area to the right of your screen. Perhaps you've heard of opportunity mapping before. Perhaps you've used it. Perhaps this is completely new to you. So just based on your understanding of opportunity mapping, what are the main reasons you or your company would use opportunity mapping? Be interested to see the results of this. Okay.
Neil, the votes just coming through. So at the moment, it's neck and neck between identifying cost beneficial solutions and identification of multiple sites.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Much
So
appreciated.
just jumped.
Oh.
So the lead at the moment is identification of multiple sites suitable for SuDS.
Excellent. Interesting. Thank you. So there are a number of reasons to use opportunity mapping. And firstly, there is a clear shift to blue-green infrastructure in recent years. So with the need for greener, more sustainable solutions, it's no longer acceptable to build large below-ground concrete tanks to store wastewater during and after storm events. So understanding where the opportunities are, whether that be in a brownfield site or as part of a catchment retrofit scheme, is becoming more and more important. Secondly, taking the legwork out of optioneering. So the locations of quick wins, where the benefits are greatest, which opportunities are the most cost effective, particularly where budgets are always tight. And actually, where SuDS may be possible, having some initial information allows us to have early conversations with stakeholders to understand their drivers and expectations. And thirdly, the opportunity mapping helps us quickly identify potential schemes and solutions. that allow us to hit the ground running when looking to implement blue-green infrastructure solutions. As I said, opportunity mapping is just a tool and should be used in conjunction with other data sources such as site visits, local knowledge, etc., to build up a holistic understanding of the site. Next slide, please. So why use these inputs? Well, master map is used to identify the land use and subsequently whether a surface will generate runoff or whether it can be used to attenuate, convey, or dispose of surface water. LiDAR that allows us to assess the level of two locations and therefore whether a solution is possible. Obviously, water cannot run uphill. And BGS data and infiltration maps are used to assess the viability for infiltration SuDS. The river network indicates where a potential outfall could be located. If a site is close to a watercourse, this may present an easy opportunity to discharge runoff. Surface water flood maps and flood zones may indicate areas that could become inundated or overwhelmed. But at the same time, within a catchment, this data may indicate where we really should be considering putting SuDS upstream of these points. The drainage network allows us to identify points where connection back into the surface water system may be possible, particularly where there's no infiltration available and no watercourses are in the vicinity. And habitat data. So this allows us to avoid potentially disrupting sensitive habitats and also provides us the opportunities of identifying locations where complementary features may be installed to boost biodiversity and existing habitats. Next slide, please. So at the start of opportunity mapping process, the surface polygons in master map are separated based on whether they produce runoff or could accept runoff, similar to an impermeable area survey. Surfaces that may be suitable for SuDS implementation, which are predominantly going to be green spaces, are labelled sinks. The surfaces identified as producing high percentages of runoff, such as roads, roofs and pavements, these are labelled sources. We also identify surfaces which could be both a source and a sink. So locations such as car parks or driveways or other open spaces. For example, a paved area within a housing development that currently produces runoff, but could be used for SuDS if desired. And finally, we need to connect the sources and sinks appropriately. We don't want to propose draining a warehouse roof into a tree pit, for example, or a single small roof into a large attenuating feature, wasting our own time. So next slide, please. And Bryony, over to yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Okay, so there are numerous considerations that need to be taken into account during the creation of opportunity mapping. So firstly, it's really important to follow the drainage hierarchy when looking at how your identified sinks are going to discharge. So firstly, is there an opportunity to harvest rainfall through water butts on a property level? Secondly, are the ground conditions suitable for infiltration? And then thirdly, is there a watercourse nearby or adjacent where we can discharge to? And finally, if none of the above are available, then it's back into the pipe system. So this is where the input data that Neil mentioned comes into play, and we can set various parameters associated with the decision making around this. So just as Neil's touched on the last slide, conveyance is a key consideration. We need to think about how the sources and sinks are going to connect. Is that via a swale? Is it a direct connection? Is connection even possible if the elevations don't work? So as part of this, we need to consider the relative volumes, as this might impact the SuDS types that would be appropriate. And then just some other general constraints that need to be considered when considering the suitability of SuDS. So these could include slopes, presence of roads, presence of sewers. These are only examples. So obviously this is not a comprehensive list of all the constraints that we need to look at. For example, we might not have any information on utility locations, but obviously if we're looking at excavation of land or below ground suds, then services within roads obviously become critical. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the outputs from opportunity mapping. So this, the figure on the slide is just a GIS layer coloured up using the master map polygons as outlines. So you get a visual example, and this is a sinks layer, and some of the typical information that might be included. So feasible SuDS types, often there will be more than one type of SuDS suitable for a given location, and for each of these feasible options, the layer can tell you what the source is, what the sink type is, and the discharge. So for example, the large car park sort of towards the centre of the screen, coloured sort of in green, indicates that a rain garden is possible there. So that would be the SuDS type. The source would be the car park itself generating the runoff as an impermeable surface. But the sink would also be the car park. So this is one of the situations that Neil's mentioned where the same area is both a source and a sink. And then in this example, it's actually indicated that infiltration is possible. So the BGS layers are showing that the ground conditions are suitable for infiltration. So that's your feasible types. What we can do then is specify a dominant SuDS types. This is often selected as a sort of a function of the software and driven by perhaps process or framework choices. So this can vary dependent on the driver of the project, for example. So volume removal. So you could work out and be provided with the approximate volume that could be removed via implementation of SuDS in that polygon. So this would just be calculated based on a specified rainfall event and the area of the impermeable surface. Next one is cost. So you can get high level cost outputs. Generally this is based on a per unit cost per metre square for each SuDS types. And as well as that, you can get operational costs, so a sort of typical associated maintenance cost for the specified SuDS types, just to give you an indication of sort of high level costing at concept design stage. I think it was mentioned, it provides outputs of feasible discharge methods, so whether that's infiltration, watercourse, or pipe discharged. So each polygon will be given a preferred discharge method based on some of the input data we saw earlier. And finally, it can also be a tool to identify the co-benefits associated with implementing SuDS, e.g. the provision and enhancement of green space for recreation, air quality improvements, and carbon benefits. Next slide, please. So quickly, how would we then, once we've got opportunity mapping, how would we then use it on a sort of a day-to-day basis? So firstly, we could, if you've got a catchment with a known driver, so whether that's hydraulic flooding, capacity issues, or you've got a high CSO spiller, surface water separation might be a viable solution. So then you need to understand, obviously, what is the root cause of the problem in order to identify where SuDS may be best located for the biggest impact. So once you've understood the root cause, opportunity mapping can be then used as part of the optioneering phase of a project to identify possible sinks and sources. And this is then used in conjunction with hydraulic modelling to refine any possible identified solutions. And then finally, we need to understand the impacts and the multiple benefits provided by SuDS types in the selected location. So this can enable decisions to be made and schemes to be implemented and feed into any sort of stakeholder engagement or cost beneficial decisions. And then, next slide, sorry, Irina. This is just a couple of hyperlinks to some relevant documents. So retrofitting to manage surface water and the SuDS manual, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And then I think that's yep, next slide, please. And then just thank you all for listening. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you for that, Neil and Bryony. Just to say that we'll be circulating links for some of those documents a little bit later on this morning in the next delegate pack. So there's opportunities to ask some questions, and I in the absence of questions for the moment, I've got one, Bryony and Neil. I can see how the tool and the approach speeds up the process of looking at a site. How often is there a comparison undertaken between what the tool says and what opportunities there might be in terms of walking the site and looking at opportunities in terms of understanding that the local characteristics, what the community were like? How often is that kind of cross-checking undertaken following the run through the model or the tool?
So that's one I'm happy to handle, Paul. So essentially, every time that the mapping tool is run, or the opportunity mapping tool is run, depending on the situation, whether that's for a whole catchment, obviously we can't go and check the viability of the solutions across the whole catchment. That would be a lot of time to do that. More on a local basis, where we've got an idea of what might be going on when we're engaging with stakeholders, local authorities, water companies, and speaking to people on the ground. It's almost a verification of what the outputs are by discussing, each of the sites. People generally know what's going on in their patch, and so essentially the answer to the question is, whenever we're using it and we're engaging with people, we are verifying that the outputs are as we expect it, and in fairness, most of the time they are, although from time to time they sometimes slightly differ. The infiltration maps, the BGS data, it's not as granular as one might want, so there are situations where we hope to get infiltration, and that doesn't appear to be the case, following subsequent infiltration tests. So it's variable, but on the whole it's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Neil. Okay, so there's the flurry of questions coming in, and also a flurry of upvoting. So I think the most popular questions come through from Emma Cooper. So the question is, whilst opportunity mapping is great, how are the natural features once constructed being mapped? Is there something around symbology, etc.? How is this being managed as an industry for a consistent approach?
Wow. Okay. Perhaps I mean that might be down to maybe some sort of national a plan to put something together. Whether it's an industry body that needs to lead that, Paul, looking at you, but I think that's a great idea, to be perfectly honest.
I think it may be done. I think it may have been done. I know that HR Wallingford were working with Water UK to look at consistent symbology for SuDS. I'm not necessarily sure about natural features, and I know there's also a lot of local authorities obviously doing their asset registers around
absolutely
some of the flood risk infrastructure. So I think that's something that we could probably go away and look at, but I'm pretty certain that there is a symbology approach being developed that would have been shared with the water companies for sure. I don't know how far it's been disseminated, but we can find out about that. So I think it's a very good point, and I think it has been looked into. So that's great. So looking at where we are for time, I think I might just leave it there for the moment, and then I'll pass over to our others for discussion later on. But thank you, Neil and Bryony. Thanks for those answers. Okay, great stuff.
Yep.
So now I'd like to invite our last speaker, who is Chris Digman. And Chris is from Stantec, and he'll be presenting on estimating the benefits from SuDS. So Chris has worked in the industry for over 20 years to reduce flood risk to communities and sustainably manage water. He has authored a number of SIRIA and SIREN guidance documents to support wastewater and stormwater management, and I've worked with Chris on a number of projects over the years, and one of them being BEST. So Chris is a visiting professor in University of Sheffield and a fellow of ICE and SciWem. So Chris is going to lead us through the next topic on benefits. And again, there will be a poll middle way of the presentation, and I will provide some feedback on results. There is a bit of a lag, Chris, from looking at it. So if you give it, I'll come back to you maybe a minute or two after we've said the poll is available. So, and over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Paul, thank you for that kind introduction, and good morning, everybody. So yes, I'm going to kind of talk through the benefits assessment piece and just trying to explain some things in terms of actually how we can actually undertake a benefit assessment. So there's 3 core areas that I'd like to kind of cover off today with yourselves. So firstly, talk about, give a little background to why we should assess benefits. We've already heard actually from Emily, Neil and Bryony a little bit about that. So I'm just going to build on that a little bit because we always have actually assessed benefits. It's just that we've maybe done it in a very focused way. I don't want to talk about how we can assess benefits, and this is as much about how you think. So this is before you get to using a tool. It's about how you might think about the process that you need to go through. And that very much links to some of the pre-material that we kind of circulated earlier this week as a bit of prep work. And then finally, I want to kind of conclude with broadly what you need to assess benefits. So, as I mentioned, we've always actually assessed benefits. Maybe it was to assess the reduction of flood risk, maybe it was CSO spill reduction, possibly it was to improve, look for an improvement in receiving water quality. But some solutions will simply offer wider benefits than others. If we take the grey infrastructure solution shown on the left here, well, that provides very targeted benefits. But schemes with SuDS and blue-green infrastructure give us a lot more. Therefore, when we compare the cost of different types of solutions, we also really need to assess the benefits of them. And it's also important to note that the wider benefits attract wider funding and co-delivery, and Emily really kind of touched on this earlier. 3 partner organisations shown here on the screen working in the Northeast have been working together to manage flooding, but deliver and bring funding together. And in part, that was through actually understanding the wider benefits. Because water is not constrained to one owner, so to speak, and water connects across lots of different systems. And also, when we're looking at the wider benefits, it's going to be really critical for the implementation of drainage strategy and community development. But if we don't value those benefits, it's harder to demonstrate why we should maybe go down that route at times. So what are some of those kind of benefits? Well, SuDS can bring lots of different types of benefits. Depending upon what is planted, they might improve air quality. They might provide cooling, slow the flow, enhance the area to make it a more pleasant place to live and work. It could be to improve the physical and mental health and well-being, and so on. But working through in a logical way to try and capture these, whilst recognizing there is some uncertainty, is really important. It's quite easy to overestimate benefits, and when that's spotted, it can actually undermine decisions. So it's important that we really give that some thought. We also record down our judgment, sometimes our estimates, but we record our decision making. Oh, went a little bit too quick. So this is the poll time, and hopefully the poll will be coming up for you now. But I want you just it's a very simple yes and no question for you to answer. And I would like you to kind of actually think about, okay, so if I was to go and plant a tree, and I plant exactly the same tree in all these locations shown on here, so whether it's in the middle of a field, amongst the cows, in a town, or in a real dense urban city, do you think that it will create the same benefit? So I'd just like you to vote yes or no. I can already see that the votes are piling in, and glad to see that we're kind of generally kind of going for the no. But why is it a no? Well, it's a no because the context of where you, whether it's kind of retrofitting and you're looking to kind of put in new SuDS or green infrastructure, is really crucial to help you think about the level of benefit that you will actually try and create. And that's a real danger that we have to guard against when we at times take an automated process. So understanding context is really important. So let's talk about how for a moment. So I expect many of you will have heard about systems thinking. Well, evaluating benefits is really actually about thinking about those systems, and it's about breaking down. So it's about you do one thing and that creates an impact. That could be a positive or negative impact. And when we come to assess benefits, that is literally what we are thinking about. When you do something, what will be the impact? Or what will be the follow-on impact and the follow-on impact? And it'll cross between water and other systems as well. So really, when we assess benefits, it's all about your thought process. Now, the next two slides were in your pack that we shared before the event today. So I won't actually go through in all the detail, but I will just actually run through a little bit. Because firstly, this kind of step-by-step process here on this slide is what actually gives you your kind of thought process to step through. So if we start on the left-hand side, so you firstly think what the intervention could be. Now, you probably already know what that intervention is, and what is the context you're going to go and actually kind of put it into. So you understand its surroundings. You understand how it might interact. You then ask yourself, well, how is it going to work? So this could be from a water management perspective, but also it could be the other functions that it might perform. So it could be an educational function. And so you want to also understand how it might perform over time. And will it be working on its own? Or like many SuDS solutions that we put in, which is kind of a little bit different to the more traditional grey infrastructure approach, will it be working in combination? You then need to think about, well, what does it change? What will be the impact? Will it improve the air quality? Will it reduce runoff by reusing the water? So you think about what that change will actually be. And then you ask, how much will it change? So that fourth part here. What will be the size of the benefit? And that really depends upon what we're going to use to determine that as well. Because we might actually have to estimate it. Or we might be using a model to help us actually understand that. But then when we've been through that process, we get to the end in terms of, well, what is the final outcome? Both in terms of maybe describing it qualitatively, but also then actually kind of determining the monetary value for that. And that is really then where using the benefit estimation tool, or BEST, from Syria actually comes in. So we'll take a look at this next slide, which again is very similar, or is actually what you kind of would have seen in the pack that was circulated. So let's just run through the steps here now, which is essentially what you run through when you actually complete the BEST tool. And it's worth me saying, when we get to the practical session later on, we'll actually just be running through just exactly how to use the tool as well, just to help you kind of go through that. So firstly, in the tool, you need to estimate or calculate the quantity. So that might be the number of people who will benefit. You then need to select the monetary value from a selection list. And that's one which you can kind of actually drop down and actually select. And you'd often then link that to the guidance and see what the guidance is saying about those monetary values. Because really you want to kind of connect the most appropriate monetary value to your intervention and your context. So we then like to actually think about the confidence of the quantity and the applicability of the monetary values that we've selected. And you can select within the tool a 25, a 50, a 75, or 100% value. So it's a very simple way, but quite a powerful way for us to actually think around, do we think these numbers are right? Then you also need to enter in the start and finish year for the benefits. So when will the benefits start to kick in? That's not always the same time as you've actually finished the planting, for example. And then when does your benefit period end? And then also you need to ensure that you have the right discount rates, and different stakeholders and partners may use some slightly different rates depending upon what rules that they might be following. And it's not something for you to worry about today, but it is an important factor when you understand what things cost or the benefit now and in the future. Oh, skipped ahead again. So I just want to offer a note of caution though, because it does take care when we evaluate benefits. And if we take this example here, this is a kind of a swale which has kind of actually been built into this kind of field. So we might not actually really be changing much here. There might be a slight change, positive or negative, around the biodiversity and ecology, but not to any great effect. So again, the context here is actually really important. The other thing to remember, and this has come up in a couple of questions or on the chat already during the session, is it's about double counting, because it's quite easy for some benefits to actually overlap. And that is in part because of actually how the evaluation studies that enables us to actually place a monetary value on certain green infrastructure, for example, might have actually undertaken the study. So we do have to take a little bit of care with that. And often we might actually look to say, well, which is the most appropriate benefit for us to kind of use here, and not include more than one when we think there is a risk of double counting. Now, simply when we come to calculate benefits, the benefit estimation tool really kind of works off two fundamental parts. Firstly, we calculate the yearly benefit, and that is by looking at the quantity of the beneficiaries. So, for example, as I said, that could be the number of people. We then look at the benefit, if we times it by the benefit monetary value, and then we times it by the confidence. And that gives us the yearly benefit. We then calculate that for each year, and we then summate that up for each year within our period of when our start and finish for the benefit. And this is where the discounting rate comes in for us to calculate what's called the present value. And it's a very standard calculation, but I'm sure some of you will already be familiar with. And that's what BEST actually allows us to do. So what do you often need? Well, that's going to depend. You may need populations, and that can often be a difficult part to determine. And sometimes you might lack a little bit of evidence. And this is where you can both use the guidance to steer you, but also you may need to estimate and give your reasoning and record it down. you may need to understand the size of the interventions or the number of the interventions that you've actually got. And as I mentioned, kind of linked to a couple of previous slides, understanding about time and duration and when those benefits will actually start. Because some SuDS, for example, you may build, but you need to protect them for a year, even to start to actually mature. And critically, and I hope this point is really coming through, you really understand that local context, because that really might actually change the numbers and the monetary values that you actually get out. And so it's all about you thinking and not blindly following a process. Now, I've mentioned the guidance. The guidance is both accessible through the BEST tool, which will take you to it being online, or you can actually download the guidance as well. And that's quite comprehensive in terms of covering both how to use parts of a tool, but also the data and the information that sits behind the tool to help you when you come to look at each benefit. So that brings us to the end of the summary of assessing the benefits. There is a lot more information through the SuDS website, which you can see not only stuff around BEST, also case studies that actually support BEST and give you some more kind of insight, as well as a lot of other really helpful kind of guidance linked to SuDS and blue-green infrastructure. So we'll look to leave that there and pause there. And there's a chance, I think, for clarifications or comments.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for that presentation and overview of BEST. So we do have some questions, and the first one is from Ben, and Ben's asking where the driver for identifying SuDS solutions is hydraulic flooding or CSO spills. How effective is SuDS in reality? Do we have good evidence of benefit, and does this benefit depreciate over time?
Good question, Ben. So firstly, SuDS solutions, like any solution, it depends how you want them to actually work. We've seen some solutions where you might say, just say, put in a detention basin, and that might be on a surface water system, for example, and that acts just like a storage. You may be looking at more distributed SuDS across an area. And the key thing here is if you need to view your SuDS as a whole system type and a whole way to actually manage, and you may look at how you need to actually manage flows and both below ground and really closely within the SuDS to make sure that it actually works and actually gives you the benefit. Now, if you do that, there are some very good examples of how that's been used to either manage some of the CSO spills. For example, up in Northumbria, in Whitburn, a blue-green infrastructure approach combined with some grey was a key way to actually both manage and hold and surface water to actually achieve that kind of outcome. The other question which you had was around, do we have good evidence of the benefit, and does this benefit depreciate over time? Well, so the BEST tool actually allows for that kind of depreciation in terms of accounting terms. But what's always important, I think, when we're looking at SuDS, particularly compared with a grey infrastructure, is at times we may and have to do more capital maintenance. We may have to do more kind of operational maintenance at times to ensure that something doesn't start to actually maybe reduce in its quality and continues to actually provide those kind of actually benefits. Whereas we often a little bit forget with grey infrastructure, we kind of fit it, we believe it works all the time, but actually that actually does require actually a lot of maintenance as well. So the benefits can remain, we just need to make sure that they actually do.
Great, thank you for the question and the answer, Chris. I think I'm afraid we're probably going to have to take it, leave it there and take some of these questions maybe over to the discussion session at the end of the next session, if that's possible. So, but thank you for that. So thank you for the presentations we've had so far this morning, and also thank you for the questions.